Zabardast shuruate, emotional depth bihe our setting be powerful hai. Main isay lambakar rahahun, lekin asal theme, feel our jazbat ko barkara rakte hue. Ye lo pela hissa, though the detail main. The ancient cliffs of Portofino, Italy, stood defiantly against the sweeping winds of the Ligurian Sea, their rugged silhouettes carved by centuries of salt, sorrow, and whispered secrets. They rose like stern, silent guardians, watchful and unmoved, bearing witness to generations of passion, betrayal, and bloodlines too proud to admit their ruin. Below them, the sea crashed against the rocks in a rhythm that had outlived empires, a mournful lullaby echoing the sighs of those who had loved and lost within its view. Sophia Rossi had always despised this place, not with the loud fury of youth, but with the quiet, aching resentment that grows over time, like rust under paint, eating away at the foundation until it finally shows. Villa Sospiri, the Villa of Sighs, was both her inheritance and her curse. It clung desperately to the cliff's edge, its ochre walls pitted and faded by decades of sun and brine, its shutters hanging like tired eyelids on a face too proud to cry. There was a kind of haunted elegance to it, like an aging opera singer still wearing her stage makeup long after the audience had gone home. 20 years ago, it had been the stage of unspeakable tragedy. Her mother, Isabella, had flung herself from the third-floor balcony, her white nightgown billowing like a broken sail in the wind, moments after discovering her husband's third affair. The scandal had silenced the Rossi name across Liguria, whispers turning to silence, friends turning away, as if grief were contagious. Sophia had only been 10, old enough to remember the sound of the scream, but too young to understand its depth. Now, as Sophia dragged her scuffed leather suitcase across the foyer's cracked marble tiles, a place where grandeur had long ago given way to decay, she felt that same dread curling in her chest. A ghost of the past, or a premonition. She wasn't sure. Matthias Bauer followed a few steps behind her, his loafers clicking with practiced precision, each step measured, controlled. Everything about him radiated control. The neatly pressed collar of his linen shirt, the German efficiency with which he had booked their travel, the almost irritating calm with which he surveyed the crumbling villa. It clashed starkly with the villa's moody, chaotic spirit, as if he were a man trying to bring order to a thunderstorm. A decade ago, she had clung to that calm. He had been her anchor, her safe place. She'd met him in Paris. She, the passionate Italian photojournalist with wind-blown curls and fierce convictions, chasing stories in war zones and refugee camps. He, the immaculately dressed German negotiator, with a mind for policy and a heart hidden behind lock and key. Their love had sparked like flint striking stone, unexpected, unlikely, and blazing in its intensity. Midnight walks along the Seine under a crescent moon, passionate arguments in cafes over politics and poetry, spontaneous road trips through the Alps. Then came the wedding. Sunlight pouring through the cypress trees in Tuscany, her grandmother's veil trailing behind her like mist. It had felt like something eternal. But fairy tales, Sophia had learned, don't end at the wedding. They fray, slowly, silently, like silk catching on thorns. Now, 10 years in, the seams were showing. And she couldn't help but wonder, had the ghosts of this house been waiting for her all along? Agar ye toner style up ko pasand ay to aglapart bejdain, may na si flow main continue karunga. Ye, part be bohut strong hai, subtle tension, emotional layers, are setting ka us bohut effective hai. May na say lambakar rahun, lekin ashli tone or nuance ko barkarar rakte hue. Ye lo is ka expanded version. It had begun like all endings do, quietly, almost politely. There were no slammed doors or teary breakdowns, just a gradual shift, like a painting fading in sunlight. Matthias's frequent business trips to Brussels for EU consultations had once seemed routine, part of the life they'd chosen together, a price paid for ambition. But over time, the trips had stretched longer, the gaps between calls widened, and the details in his itinerary began to blur like smudged ink. What once felt like professionalism now felt evasive. His phone, once carelessly tossed onto the kitchen counter with the keys and receipts, had become a shadowy presence, never out of reach, never unlocked. It began to sleep with him, tucked inside his leather briefcase like a secret. And Sophia noticed everything. Her instincts had been sharpened by years of looking for truth through a lens, framing moments in war-torn cities, freezing pain, joy, and betrayal in a single click. Her gut twisted with a familiar dread, the kind she felt before entering refugee camps or riot zones, when everything looked calm, but the air crackled with the potential for chaos. She confronted him once, the question trembling behind her lips like an unshed tear. "Are you hiding something from me?" He had smiled then, infuriatingly calm, pressing a kiss to her forehead as if she were a child asking about monsters under the bed. "Liebling," he'd said with a half-laugh, his German accent curling around the word like warm silk. "You Italians see drama in drizzle." But drizzle, as Sophia well knew, could turn to storm, and storms had a way of uncovering what lay buried. The idea to renovate Villa Sospiri had come from Matthias, almost out of nowhere. A fresh start, he'd called it. Something real, he'd said, eyes gleaming with the kind of conviction she hadn't seen in him in months. He'd spoken of restoring the villa to its former glory, of legacy, of giving their future children a home that wasn't just beautiful, but meaningful. Sophia had smiled and nodded, but inside she couldn't shake the feeling that it was a cover, a distraction, a way to keep her busy while his secrets grew roots elsewhere. The villa wasn't a fresh start, it was a mausoleum of mistakes. Every cracked tile, every peeling fresco seemed to breathe the past. Her father, Carlo Rossi, the dashing Genoese shipping magnate with salt in his blood and sin in his smile, had ruled these halls like a king with many queens. Sophia could still remember the way the staff would go quiet when certain women arrived, their perfume lingering in the air long after they'd gone. The same air her mother had breathed in silence until the silence consumed her. And now, the same air filled Sophia's lungs. She moved through the villa like someone walking through an inherited nightmare, each step stirring ghosts. Her mother's presence was everywhere, in the faded damask curtains that rustled with secrets, in the cracked mirror that hung above the fireplace where Isabella used to brush her hair, in the chill that curled around Sophia's spine every time she stood on the same balcony where it had all ended. There were moments, fleeting, irrational, when she felt her mother's voice in the rustle of leaves or the creak of floorboards. Warnings, maybe, echoes. But Sophia had never been one to run from shadows. She photographed them for a living. Still, something told her this time. The shadows might bite back. Agarya style tiklagrahai to, agla hisabhej dain. Main ready hun storiko isi mudmin agay barhanikilye. Bohot kubsurat or layered likha gaya hai. Harline main grief or legacy ka wait mesus hoda hai. Chalo, main isay detail main expand kartahun, lekin asal jazbat or mood ko zinda rakte hue. The first week at Villa Sospiri drifted by like a dream woven from dust and denial. Mornings bled into evenings, the air thick with plaster and ghosts. Outside, the cliffs stood as silent sentinels, their jagged edges slicing into the sky, while inside, time warped around half-unpacked boxes, open paint cans, and memories too heavy to move. Matthias wasted no time imposing order. He flew in a team of German engineers, stoic men with laser levels, hard hats, and an allergy to inefficiency. Their crisp, monotone discussions echoed off the villa's high ceilings, their plans meticulously drawn and ruthlessly executed. Beams were measured, walls scanned, foundations assessed. The Germans moved like surgeons in an operating room, precision in every motion. In stark contrast, the Italian contractors, local artisans and craftsmen, arrived late, spoke with their hands, and worked with the passion of poets. They argued over tile colors, debated fresco techniques, and serenaded the walls with bursts of operatic humming. Dust rose around them like stage fog, their tools clinking in chaotic harmony. It was a collision of worlds, German order versus Italian soul. And Sophia watched the friction with a distant sort of amusement, as if observing someone else's life. She didn't involve herself in the renovation. Not really. Instead, she slipped away when no one was looking, wandering through the halls of her childhood like a ghost, retracing her own footprints. She unearthed old photo albums from a mildewed trunk in the attic, leather-bound relics smelling of mothballs and forgotten summers. Her fingers trembled as she turned the yellowing pages. There was Isabella. Rosen, of the way her mother's hands fluttered over keys like birds in flight. But that woman had vanished long before she fell from the balcony. In her place had come someone quieter, more fragile. A woman whose eyes never met the mirror. Carlo's friends had referred to her with forced civility as the sensitive type. A euphemism for the nervous breakdowns, the whispered prescriptions, the quiet withdrawals from parties she used to command. But Sophia knew better. Her mother hadn't been weak. She had been worn down, eroded like stone beneath a leaking roof. The real Isabella revealed herself not in music, but in ink. Sophia had found the diaries by accident, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the library. Her sanctuary as a child, now a dusty tomb. Bound in worn leather, the pages exhaled secrets as she opened them. They were filled with a slanted, hurried hand, the writing veering from elegant loops to near-mad scrawls. Grief on paper, rage given shape. Carlo came home smelling of jasmine. I hate jasmine. That single line stopped Sophia cold. Jasmine, the same scent that now clung to the corners of her memory, that sometimes drifted through the villa at night, faint but undeniable. The diaries weren't just confessions, they were cries for help. Pages bled with emotion, the ink curling like veins across the paper. Sometimes calm, sometimes manic. Some entries were long and poetic, others a single sentence scratched again and again. He doesn't love me. Or worse, I don't exist anymore. As Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor, the diary trembling in her hands, she realized she was no longer just remembering her mother. She was beginning to understand her. Agar ye tone or lumbi narrative apko tikla grahiho, to agla part bejdain. Maintayar hun is rhythm minage bartnikilye. Wah. Ab kahani ne apni emotional or narrative climax ki taraf pehla kadam raka hai. Betrayal, history ka repetition, or personal destruction ka wait bahut beautifully layer hua hai. Main ise expand ka raha hun. Subtle tension, visual imagery, or emotional gravity ko deepen karte hu. One evening, while the sun bled across the Portofino sky in shades of rust and regret, Sophia found herself drawn to the villa's ancient wine cellar. A place thick with mildew, forgotten years, and the perfume of buried indulgence. She had wandered there absent-mindedly, following the scent. Wah. Ab kahani ne apni emotional or narrative climax ki taraf pelakadam raka hai. Betrayal, history ka repetition, or personal destruction ka wait bahut beautifully layer hua hai. Main ise expand ka raha hun. Subtle tension, visual imagery, or emotional gravity go deepen karte hu. One evening, while the sun bled across the Portofino sky in shades of rust and regret, Sophia found herself drawn to the villa's ancient wine cellar, a place thick with mildew, forgotten. Wah. Ab kahani ne apni emotional or narrative climax ki taraf pela kadam raka hai. Betrayal, history ka repetition, or personal destruction ka wait bahut beautifully layer hua hai. Absolutely haunting. This twist binds the generational tragedy full circle, and Sophia's final act, choosing to walk away, is both quiet and earth-shattering. Let's deepen this section further, stretch the tension, and give it the cinematic weight it deserves. That night, as a storm threatened the horizon and the villa creaked with old breath, Sophia wandered its halls like a soul unmoored. Shadows bloomed in the corners. The jasmine-scented air clung to her skin like memory. Every step felt pulled by the past, every room echoing with her mother's sighs. Isabella's ghost lingered in every mirror, eyes rimmed with silence, fingers stained with sonatas no one would hear again. Drawn by something between instinct and dread, Sophia found herself in Carlo's old study. The door groaned open, revealing a time capsule of arrogance and decay. Dark walnut bookshelves, a desk carved like a cathedral, the air thick with cigar smoke long since extinguished. On the far wall, a replica of Caravaggio's Judith beheading Holofernes loomed, violent, dramatic, theatrical. Sophia had always hated it. Tonight, it called to her. She pressed her palm against the gilded frame, and it shifted with a soft click. Behind it, a hidden compartment. Inside, a pistol. Cold, compact, waiting. And beside it, a faded photograph. The image had browned with age, the edges curled like dried petals. Her father? Carlo Rossi smiled with theatrical ease, his arm slung around a woman in a white sundress, her hair coiled in dark waves, her cheekbones sharp enough to draw blood. There was something familiar about the tilt of her chin, the way her mouth curled in defiance. Sofia flipped the photo over. A date was scrawled in a woman's hand. Portofino, 1989. And suddenly, the truth fell into place, like rotten wood collapsing beneath her feet. The woman in the photo looked exactly like Clara. Not just similar, uncannily so. The same posture, the same smirk that dared the world to underestimate her. And the timeline made sense. Clara Vogel, born in 1990. Her age, her face, her uncanny access to Matthias, her obsessive need for control. Clara wasn't just a mistress. She was Carlo's daughter, a Rossi, Sofia's half-sister. The room spun, the air turned sharp and metallic. All at once, the threads of betrayal wove into a single, choking tapestry. Matthias hadn't just cheated. In his blind desperation to protect his career, he had slept with a woman tied to the very bloodline that had ruined Sofia's mother, and now was poisoning her too. The sins of the father, rewritten, repeated, reborn. She stood in the silence, staring down at the photograph until her vision blurred. The pistol remained untouched in the drawer, but its presence vibrated like a threat, or a promise. Dawn was a pale bruise across the sky when Sofia stepped outside. The sea below howled, wild and ancient, as if echoing the storm inside her. She walked barefoot across the dew-slick grass to the cliff's edge where Isabella had once stood, fragile and forgotten, on the final night of her life. Behind her, the villa glowed faintly, its ochre walls bathed in first light, a cradle of grief and history. Matthias was calling her name, frantic. She didn't turn. He reached her, breathless, panic clouding his face. "Sofia, please," he said, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. You and me. We're not like them." But the wind stole his words. The sea rose up, indifferent. Sofia stood still for a long time, toes kissing the edge, arms at her sides. She didn't jump. She didn't scream. She turned, and she walked away. Each step was a rejection of inheritance, of betrayal, of being the next woman destroyed by the Rossi name. Behind her, the villa groaned as the sun broke free of the horizon, casting the cliffs, the ruins, and everything she had known into stark golden light. She wasn't her mother. She wouldn't be. If you like, I can help write an epilogue, something that shows Sofia rebuilding or leaving Italy behind, or even a flash forward years later. Want to end it here? Or keep going? This is a stunning and poetic end, layered, symbolic, and unflinchingly honest. Let me expand it slightly to heighten the catharsis, strengthen the imagery, and allow Sofia's quiet power to truly resonate. 2 months later, Villa Sospiri reopened, not as a mausoleum of silence, but as a living confession. She renamed it Galleria della Verità, the Gallery of Truth. Gone were the heavy velvet drapes and ancestral oil portraits. The dust had been cleared, the rot excised. In their place, light poured through open windows, illuminating walls lined with Sofia's most visceral work. Children caught in the crossfire of forgotten wars, mothers clinging to the ghosts of sons, lovers parting at barbed wire borders. Her photographs did not flatter. They revealed. Near the central arch, encased in minimalist black, hung the portrait that stopped most visitors in their tracks. Matthias. Half his face submerged in shadow, the other lit in stark contrast, revealing the tight set of his jaw, the flicker of guilt in his eyes. She had titled it simply, The Architect of Lies. Critics called the exhibit a masterstroke of catharsis, raw, unyielding, as intimate as it is indicting. Matthias called it a betrayal. Sofia called it survival. News trickled in through legal channels and whispered conversations. Clara had miscarried. The pregnancy that had once been a weapon now withered into a grief she couldn't publicly mourn. The scandal had detonated across EU law circles like a slow bomb. Matthias's name, once synonymous with polished negotiation, was now a cautionary tale. But Sofia felt no triumph. Justice, she learned, was not a clean wound. It scabbed over unevenly.